Friends and enemies, heroes and villains, welcome to Epic Realms. I am Nick, and with us today is an award-winning miniature sculptor, RPG designer, and author of multiple books. Welcome, Robert Charrette. Is it close?
You got it right.
Yes, I got it. Nailed it.
Happy to be here.
Well, I appreciate you stopping by. You are not an easy person to find, by the way. At least you weren't an easy person for me to find. I had to find you through a Facebook page that I wasn't sure was even, that you were even a part of, because some people have like 60 pages. So I'm really glad I was able to find you and chat with you, and I'm glad to have you on. This is exciting. You're kind of a jack of all trades when it comes to the gaming world, and I mean, even more than just the gaming world, but you've done, as I said, miniature sculpting, RPG design, illustrations, just run the gamut, writing novels. How did you get into that genre of stuff? Did you do that after like school or
always imagination has been a part of my existence. And when I was in college, I was introduced to this new game called Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
Which provided a way of playing that I had never encountered before, but was full of imagination. And that led to trying to work with other people while playing this game and understand where all the characters were and what they could do. Well, because everybody's got a slightly different picture in their head.
Right.
So we started using miniatures. So there weren't a lot in those days, and they certainly didn't represent everybody's characters. So I started sculpting. And, a lot of my careers have been one thing leading to another. And I'm sure you've got some questions for me that will bring up some of those.
Yes, for sure. You said you got into D&D during college then. So what did you go to college for? Did you go to college for that kind of stuff, or did you go to college for something else?
My degree is in geology and biology.
Oh, wow. Any particular like specification in those, or?
Well, my school did not have a degree in paleontology.
Okay. So you kind of were aiming for that.
That's what I wanted to do. Yeah.
Okay.
Weren't a lot of jobs for paleontologists in those days.
Right.
So I fell back on, this is all pre-Jurassic Park, mind you.
Okay. All right.
Fell back on my artistic bent and got jobs as a graphic artist back before there were computers to do that kind of stuff.
Right. Did you
full circle? I'm back to doing graphic design again. I'm doing book design and layout for a small press called Freelance Academy Press.
Oh, okay.
Deals with historical martial arts.
That's awesome. Did you always have a liking for? Obviously, you wanted to do paleontology, but like historical martial arts and things like that.
Well, as a child, I was fascinated by knights and dinosaurs, so naturally, my knight and dinosaur toys kind of got together.
Okay.
And the martial arts didn't come till college either.
Okay.
But I always wanted to know how knights really fought. So I joined an organization called the Society for Creative Anachronism.
Yep, the SCA.
Because I thought they might know. And back then, the perceived wisdom was there were no surviving books that covered the topic. So I got good at their game, but I didn't learn how knights fought from them.
Right.
That didn't come till a couple of decades later.
But I bet it helped with the RPG game stuff, right? At least a little bit.
It did. In its own way.
Right.
In its own way. But it wasn't specifically accurate. But I had an interest in that kind of stuff. I grew up about an hour away from the John Woodman Higgins Museum in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Which is the largest collection of armor on the continent. Not all of it was really good stuff, but it was large.
Yeah.
He was a steel magnate.
I was
rich.
I was a huge when I was in a school, middle school. I'd get all the medieval armor that I could get, and I was drawing the different types. And I had a history teacher that was really impressed with the fact that I knew the difference between a pole arm and a man catcher, and all of those, and I was drawing them out as just a kid, even though he hadn't taught it in class, just because I had gotten the books for myself. And that was
Yeah,
before I got into role playing or fantasy books or anything like that as well. So
yeah.
so I
Well,
understand the love for stuff like that. It's just so neat. When did you? So you said you started getting into illustrations and graphic design. How did you go from a paleontology degree to
well,
illustration?
um, I'd always liked to draw, um, and as I said, there weren't a lot of jobs for paleontologists, particularly
Right.
without a more advanced degree. And you know, I, to be honest, I kind of got discouraged in my college career because I had arranged to uh, get into an advanced course, normally a graduate course, which would have helped focus what I wanted to do. And I couldn't take it till my senior year because it was only offered on alternate years. And that was the year the professor decided to take a sabbatical,
Oh,
and it kind of crashed my whole plan.
that sucks. That's a bummer.
So yeah, well, I I moved to another state, got involved in doing graphics, as I said. Uh, Not terribly exciting, but I had encountered Dungeons and Dragons at that point and the SCA, uh, and there were people down there, and things developed from there.
Yeah.
Uh, we started role playing. I was frustrated with the rules, wanted to do different subject matter, so I also started tinkering with rules.
Okay. And was that before or after? So you got into a little place called Little Soldier Games, yes?
Um, Little Soldier Games was kind of important for me in a couple of different ways. I did artwork for them, um, and the guy who started it, he saw some of the miniatures that I had sculpted for the gaming group, and insisted that they were at least as good as the stuff he was selling in his store.
Okay.
Um, and it was through him I contacted the first company that I did uh, miniature sculpting for,
Okay.
which was a now defunct operation called Adina Corporation.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna ask about that. Um, and you, for those that don't know, Little Soldier Games was like basically one of the first companies that would be considered a third party publisher that we have today, where
Yeah,
they
yeah,
did, I think they did
largely
the
did.
first bestiary. It was like a monster compendium where it was like a bunch of monsters for D&D, even though they weren't
Mhm.
licensed for D&D. So for people that don't know, that's kind of where a lot of this stuff started. I think that was where D&D got their idea for let's put a book together called the Monsters Manual was from them. I could be wrong, but I'm a
Uh,
that's
Well, I mean, D&D spawns monsters regularly. And
mhm.
everybody needs something new to fight. And I think TSR certainly had their own plans along those lines. Um, but things were kind of formless back then in terms of the game industry. It wasn't it wasn't the multi-million-dollar industry it is now. And with $1,000 and a quick print press, you could get into the business.
Right. When you mentioned the Edina Corp miniatures, how did, because you were doing miniatures for a while. How did you see the industry change from starting at the Edina Corp all the way down through doing BattleTech and Star Wars and Reaper minis and all that stuff? How did you see the industry change in that time?
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Just even the materials I was using. I was originally working in a material called Sculpey, which is a thermosetting plastic material that is popular in hobby, dollhouse hobbies and
Hmm.
crafty hobbies. Um, but it doesn't withstand vulcanization. And Adina started out as a jewelry uh, casting operation. So they were used to doing room temperature vulcanizing silicon molds of masters of all kinds of things. So they were able to make molds of what I was working in. But I had to switch to the what's called green stuff. It's a 2-pot epoxy putty
Okay.
for working with other already in the miniature business companies, because that withstands vulcanization, and it's a much harder material to work with.
Wow.
So you have to relearn it, and then years later, I was part of a couple of sculptors who were talking to the company that made green stuff. Doro was the company, and they wanted to know what sculptors wanted out of the putty.
Okay.
So I went to their factory, and Julie Guthrie and gosh, I'm blanking on her name.
That's
Sandy,
okay.
Sandy Garrity. Were talking to them on the phone, and they eventually decided they didn't want to produce it. So their lead salesman and their lead chemist broke off to their own company and produced it. And now it's called, oh gosh, Creata something.
Createx.
Anyway, it's a gray putty.
Okay.
And much better to sculpt with. It doesn't have the memory to things collapse on itself.
For those that don't,
faster.
For those that don't do miniature sculpting, because some, as far as people know, you make something and then somehow it turns into this multi-mass of, pewter or whatever out there. What is the process? You guys get it and then like sculpt it down with like just little tiny tools, and then it goes to a thing and they make a mold out of it, and then they just mass produce out of a mold?
It's a little more complicated than that.
All right.
The sculptors in those days were making them the same size that they were going to finally make, more or less. We had to adjust because of the process. But when I got started, there were people working in Sculpey like I was. There were people working on wax. Or Tom Meyer is the one who brought the epoxy putty into the industry. And I met him at a convention. I was there with Fantasy Games Unlimited, and showed him some of my stuff. And he wouldn't believe I had done it in Sculpey, because that was a material that didn't work well for him, but he was awesome with the putty. So I started to learn how to sculpt in that, and never did get into the wax.
And then they just do they make a mold out of that then?
The first part of the process is usually to make what's called a master mold.
Okay.
There will be multiple different figures in that.
Okay.
And they will cast into that mold and put it away. They'll cast enough copies to make a production mold.
All right.
Again, this is a high temperature vulcanizing system where they put the mold material and squish it down over either the sculpture or the master figure. And under high pressure, this stuff is heated till it's strong enough to stand up to the casting process.
Right.
The originals don't always survive that process. And one of the other things that happens is because it's compressing them this way, the miniatures get squeezed. Oh. So you actually have to figure out what plane it's going to be lying in.
Oh, so is that the reason that some
minis in the sculpture?
Yeah.
So you have to have extra width, but you got to get it in the right plane, and it's an art.
Is that why some of
the science.
Is that why some of the really old miniatures look a little bit more flat than they do?
That's part of it.
Okay.
Also, a lot of the companies would not go through the master process and preserve them.
Okay.
And so when they needed a new mold, they throw some of their castings in, and this just compounds the problem.
Recording on tape until you get over the crappy tape.
Some of the first work I did for Raul Partha was taking a master figure and basically building the sculpt back out to compensate.
Oh, wow. Did you get to keep any of those originals that you made?
Yeah, Partha let us keep our originals and also the stuff we worked on. And yeah, I got boxes of them.
Wow, that's amazing. So what you're saying is you have a fortune sitting back there.
I don't know if it's a fortune
the original.
or not. A couple of years ago, a fellow tracked me down through the same website you did.
Okay.
And he wanted to interview me because he was a historian of Battletech.
Oh, okay.
And, so he turned out he was living about an hour and a half away.
Oh, wow.
So he came out and talked to me. I did an interview for him, and he eventually put up the page that helps sell off some of my Battletech miniatures.
I found that page. I saw that page. Actually, some of the pictures we have scrolling in our live stream are from that page. I was like, this is really cool. And so I wasn't sure if you got rid of everything or if you kept some of it. So
apparently there was a cabal of fans of that page who found out I had the original sculptures and might be willing to part with them, and they made an offer sort of in bulk, and it was like, no, I don't think so. I think it just seemed wrong to be selling the originals for a far lesser price than painted castings.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, in toys, regular toys, when you find original castings, they go for 10 times the amount. So that shouldn't be the case. Especially, stuff from that era. They should be they should be valued way higher than that, in my opinion. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a professional collector.
My opinion agreed with you. But...
Well, and you're the professional, so you would know more than anyone else.
Not like I've sold off a lot of my greens. Some of the work I've done was work where they bought the miniature.
Yeah.
And that generally is it depends on who's buying, right? If it's a really small company, it might be a win for the sculptor, because if you take a royalty deal and they don't sell enough, you don't pay for your time.
Right.
And you got to pay for your time if you're doing it as a business.
Yeah, that's a hard sell. How did you know which deal to take, or was it just cross your fingers and hope?
Yeah, it wasn't always the right choice, but a lot of times to keep it interesting, you want to sculpt interesting things. You don't want to sculpt the same thing over and over again.
Well, and you did so many different things. Because you did like an Old West one, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Did you do an Old West, a gun?
No.
Gun something?
No, that's one genre I didn't get to.
Okay. See, there's this is what I said about the internet being wrong. I mentioned that earlier before we went live. Actually, I don't know if I actually saw that anywhere. I was just off the top of my head, for some reason I had a picture of that. But you did some Star Wars runs?
You might have gotten confused because I did some art for Fantasy Games Unlimited Wild West game.
Maybe that is what it was. There's so much stuff. Like I said, there's so much stuff out there that you had done. It's kind of crazy. And you had mentioned Battletech. You did some Star Wars miniatures, correct?
Julie Guthrie and I did the first gaming scale Star Wars miniatures for Grenadier.
Okay. And that was around the same time West End Games was doing their RPG, right? It was somewhere around the same time frame?
It was just before that.
Okay.
Because, we were doing them as part of a direct license. Well, I think maybe it was through West End. I know eventually West End bought the line.
Okay.
And added to it.
And for the people listening, when we mentioned the game Ral Partha, Ral Partha is now owned and is run by WizKids.
No, it isn't.
It is not. I could have swore that it was.
No.
All right.
It was for a while.
Okay.
It was for a while.
Did they get bought back or something? What happened there? Do you know?
One of the original owners and a fellow who was a factory manager and a couple of other people that I'm not entirely clear on put together a consortium to buy it back.
Oh, see, I didn't catch that part. Well, I was kind of right.
Yeah, and most of the the folks involved with that have got their own thing going.
Okay.
And so one of the guys who was connected to that, who ran some Kickstarters for them for the legacy figures, is now got the rights to all the old Raul Partha figures and is adding to that. And so, you know, he bought it out from them. So Raul Partha Legacy is a thing. And that's, yeah, I did some sculpts for him recently because he's planning on expanding it.
Okay.
Focusing it around a project that I was involved in with when I was with Raul Partha.
Okay.
They wanted a quick and easy game that they could run at conventions. And they had been doing a version for their historicals. And I basically did a fantasy version of it called Chaos Wars.
Okay.
And,
Yeah, I had no idea that and because I had seen that they still had stuff that was coming out, but I just assumed it was still under the WizKids title. So I just thought that they were like, well, here's the name. We're going to use the name. So that's good to know. Good to know. What is the point at which, so we talked about you build a mini and you sculpt it and it gets, pressed and goes out there. Do you enjoy going out and were you seeing your stuff on the shelf and going, hey, I made that? And how was that for you to see your own stuff on shelf?
Yeah, it's great to see people using it and enjoying it. To be honest, I cringe sometimes at some of the paint jobs, but people do the best they can. And if they're happy with it, that's the good part, right?
Right, definitely. Speaking of that, there's been spin-offs, a lot of people, they love things, so there are spin-offs. Do you pay attention to when they come out with like a Battletech video game or a Shadowrun cell phone game? Do you get a kick out of any of that stuff, or do you pay attention to it?
I don't really pay a close attention to it. Things will come to my attention now and again, but it's been so long since I touched a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And moved in, both those games, I had some involvement in the backstory. And the companies at this point have moved the storylines in ways that, well, might not have been my first choice. And, when you're deeply connected to laying out the groundwork for some of it, like I was with Shadowrun, doesn't always leave you in the happiest place when you see, characters who would never do a thing in your mindset doing something in the storylines. It
becomes difficult.
It's not a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I get that. We had Ed Greenwood on. I don't know if you know Ed at all, but he says, he mentioned,
I know the name. I don't think I've ever met him.
He did a lot of Forgotten Realms. Well, he's the guy who made Forgotten Realms, and he wrote Elminster and stuff. And so oftentimes he's like, well, I mean, I wrote it and I created it, but I don't own it. So whatever they do with him isn't up to me. And to me, it seems like that's got to be a hard pill to swallow sometimes. It's like, I did create something, but it's, so I can understand, from a third party point of view, how that's got to be difficult.
It's harder with some than others, but you sign a contract going in knowing that you're doing essentially work for hire on the design work that you do on that. And it's not like I didn't get anything out of it,
right?
They paid. There's the limited fame of a small pond, and just the enjoyment of doing it. When we were chatting before we went live, I mentioned that I've done a couple of other interviews in the relatively recent past.
Yeah.
And for a couple of them, I actually went back and reread some of my novels.
Oh, okay.
And, they, and in some ways, some of the thing that makes me feel good about it is, I'd still read them. You hear a lot of people talking about the things they wrote, decades ago and how awful they are. It's like, oh yeah, of course I can see things I would have done differently now.
Yeah.
But it's not now.
Right.
And with the novels, what's more important is um, the overall feel of them and what they inspire. I mentioned the fellow who helped me with selling off the battle mechs, Michael Todd, and he insisted I read a couple of books that had come out, both of which dealt with Wolf's Dragoons.
Okay.
Which I was given the assignment to do the first novel that featured them.
Okay.
So a lot of the early stuff on Wolf's Dragoons, I filled in. And it was very clear those guys were paying strict attention to what had come before.
Well, that's good. That's good. It's always nice when you have somebody that comes in afterwards and like does honors and makes sure that they try to stay. That's what I always say about movies. When a movie, they do a comic book movie, it's like, did the creator even look at the source material, or did they just like, I want to do my own thing. Let's make sure that let's put Superman in he won't wear a cape. I'm like, well, Superman's kind of got to have a cape. He's Superman, no red S, no big S on his chest. Well, so.
You can make the argument that the character is the character, not what he wears. And I that's a little bit closer to what I'm talking about, is when the character doesn't act like the character.
Right. I was just saying more of a, as a example,
sure,
easy, simple example. But yeah, I totally get it.
These are large intellectual properties that have long lifespans.
Right.
And the audience changes for them. And it's inevitable that they're going to change, and they're not going to satisfy everybody.
Yeah. Well, and the world changes around it. And yeah, I get that. Well, we're talking a little bit of, we're talking about the novels. How did you get into actually designing RPGs? Because you did Bushido, as you've got by the amazing shirt you have on, and Aftermath.
No involvement with Pathfinder. Sorry.
Did I say Pathfinder?
Yeah.
I thought I said Bushido.
That's what I heard anyway.
Oh, I thought I said
Bushido. I'm hard of hearing, so maybe I misheard.
I thought I said Bushido, the shirt that you got on.
Yeah, well, you said Bushido, yeah.
Yeah. And
anyway, how did I get involved with it? Well, obviously, I started playing the games, and I think Mention got dissatisfied with some of the rules and wanted to do other backgrounds. So I started creating my own place, and one of my players was Paul Jung, and he made the comment one day that the mechanics reminded him a lot of Japanese martial arts, and that one thing led to another, and we decided we would write a Japanese one because nobody had at that point. And so he was supposed to do the background, and I was supposed to do the game mechanics. And I got more and more interested in the background, and ended up doing at least as much as he did. He concentrated on the magic system. I pretty much did everything else.
Okay.
And Paul's big into magic systems. He did the magic system for Shadowrun too. The original one. Shadowrun's changed several times.
Right.
Since
I think they're on their fifth edition right now, sixth edition.
Mm-hmm.
What was your involvement on Shadowrun? How did you get in? Were you like a core creator? Because there's kind of two. We talk about online being wrong. There's kind of two different things out there that I see. Some of them are, somebody else, a couple people created it, and you kind of came in kind of near the beginning. Others that you were there from the get-go. I
was there before it was Shadowrun. I was in Chicago for a meeting with the FASA crew, and we were out at dinner, and Jordan Weissman raised the conversation. Okay, what's going to be the next big thing? Because they were looking for another property.
Right.
And this was back in the 80s. So in terms of properties that were different at the time, I suggested Cyberpunk. This was before Mike Pondsmith did his Cyberpunk was out.
Right.
And Jordan wasn't too sure about that. So shortly thereafter, he came back with another pitch. It's like, okay, going to do Shadowrun. I'm assuming we're going to do Cyberpunk, but there's magic too. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And they wanted to work with me. There's a backstory to that too, but they wanted to work with me on a game. And also they needed people who were not totally overwhelmed with handling Battletech stuff.
Right.
So it ended up that I was commissioned to take the lead on the design and put together a core team to flesh out some of Jordan's basic ideas and make them work in a game and in a game world. I agreed to do it, but I had a condition besides the usual payment.
Okay.
And that was I would get to write the first novels.
Okay.
Because even then it was very clear that the novels were a way of expanding the world and making the world clearer to the players than any game material can be.
Right.
And the gaming supplement material and stuff. There aren't characters in those really.
Yeah.
They're character ideas, but they don't. You don't get the interactions. You don't get the same kind of feel of the world as you follow a character through it.
Their personalities.
Not just the personalities of the characters, but the personality of the world.
Yeah.
What is it supposed to feel like? And then that I thought was really important to convey in this crazy world that was magical cyberpunk stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was as much of a crazy mishmash as 40K was when it was originally showed up. And I was at Jordan's place as part of a conference to flesh things out. And what are we going to call this thing? It's got magic, it's got cyberpunk. We need a name. And so I suggested Shadowrun. And he's like, I don't know what that means. It's like, well, tell him what it means.
Yeah. You want to tell our listeners what it means?
Created what a Shadowrun was.
Yeah.
And that encapsulated everything that needed to be encapsulated for the game world while still having a cool sound.
Yeah.
And
for our listeners that don't know, would you like to explain to them exactly what a Shadowrun is?
Okay. Well, like I said, it's a mix-up of magic and cyberpunk.
Mm-hmm.
So we cast for the primary roles for the players that they would be people who are outside the system. And they would be the foes of the entrenched capitalistic mega corporations.
Mm-hmm.
And a Shadowrun is an under the table, undercover operation to achieve a goal. That could easily be simple corporate espionage.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted the players to be rebels.
Yeah.
And fight the system because the system was corrupt.
Yeah.
It was inherently built to be corrupt. And there were a lot of different ways to do it. You could, since we came up with a pseudoscientific method to bring elves and orcs into the world. And there would be deckers who went into cyberspace and riggers who ran drones and street samurai who had, cyberware and weapons. It was a real throw everything in there kind of thing, and it needed explaining.
And now half of the stuff is real in the real world. You got drones and cyberspace and hacking.
Well, we were doing this back in the day, and we made some decisions. Um, like a lot of people harassed us early on about, why do you still have to jack in? Why isn't it wireless? Because wireless has terrible security.
Right.
And for people who are extremely security conscious, they don't want to be connected to something that's connected to everybody else.
Right. And I
And
mean, looking at it
do
now,
we not have security problems now when
right,
everything's wireless?
right. Well, I mean, somebody's got a wireless thermostat. Next thing you know, someone hacks into their house and unlocks all their doors, all
It's
because
not
it was
impossible.
wireless.
It's not impossible.
When you were writing the novels for something like Shadowrun and Battletech or any of those, how much of the game system did you make sure to put into the writing? So if in D&D terms, if somebody throws a fireball and it's 20 feet wide and you need this spell component, do you put that in the story when you're writing the book, or are you just telling a story and forget about the system?
For me, the story was first.
Okay.
But the two universes were a little different. Battletech already had a huge player base.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much a combat game.
Yeah.
And describing the combat in Battletech is boring if you just describe the whole thing, because it's repetitive.
Right.
And, it's all in terms of numbers. So I always tried to, use all the correct terms, but described it from a visual point of view rather than a game point of view.
Yeah.
And I've read Battletech ones that okay, I know what he rolled here because the author is describing it, because he's basically transcribing a game. And they're no fun.
Right.
They're boring. With Shadowrun, it was a little bit different because, among other things, the game system was designed to skew things sometimes, where it blew apart the mechanicalness of the normal part of the game system.
Okay.
So effects could be wildly different from what would typically happen in the game. And it was designed to be a little bit more narrative a game,
right,
than Battletech was. Battletech was very much a miniatures tabletop game. The role-playing stuff for that universe was very much a subsequent bolt-on.
Right.
And we had to toe the line a lot more on that because they had preconceptions. And that led to some interesting discussions. And because we talked about it being an IP that has lasted for a long time, is some of the stuff I was told I couldn't do when I started writing the Battletech books. Now it's all over the Battletech universe.
Yeah. Did you find yourself did you go from, when it comes to Battletech, did you go from sculpting miniatures to writing, doing the books, or was it the other way around?
Battletech, of course, my involvement with Battletech preceded Shadowrun, obviously. And it's a slightly convoluted tale, and it involves all of those things. I went with Ralph Partha to the convention where Vasa premiered Battle Droids, which was the original edition. And this circles back around to knights and armor and stuff, because these guys are in machines that they're running like giant suits of armor.
Yeah.
Except they got range weapons. So I've always been fascinated by the concept of powerful machinery controlled by people.
Yeah.
So I thought this was a cool idea. And
Yeah.
I had already been collecting some of the inspirational mecha that Battletech was using in their original designs, just because I liked the graphic design of them. So we came back from that convention knowing that Fossil was looking to have a miniatures line. And Chuck Crane, one of the owners, and I were the the ones who were pushing hard to get Ralpartha involved with Battletech.
Okay.
Didn't know who would do it. And FOSSA at that point were thinking about working with a miniature company that specialized in vehicles. And so they said, can you guys even do this? So we had to do a proof of concept, and I did that.
Okay.
And so I was involved, I guess, first with the miniatures, right? And as that relationship developed, there started to be noise about perhaps FOSSA didn't actually have permission to use those designs.
Okay.
It's a very complicated situation. And so the Ralpartha leadership got a little bit of cold feet. So I did a whole set of things that had guns in the right places, but didn't look like the anime properties.
Okay.
And those came out under Battle Droids. But then it was clear there was a market for this stuff. So the company wanted to do some more. So we developed a couple of pieces that, again, in a couple of cases, didn't quite look like the things.
Right, right.
Julie Guthrie was involved with a couple of the earliest of those that later got incorporated into the game. And the first Battletech novels had come out. And at a convention, I walked up to Jordan Weissman and said, I hear you guys are doing novels now. And he was like, who wants to know? And I said, well, I was kind of interested. He said, okay. And in short order, I had a contract to write Wolves on the Border, which was featuring Wolves Dragoons.
Okay. Which you mentioned earlier.
Well, remember I said all these things tie together.
Yep.
FOSSA started out as a third-party publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And they were putting out support for Traveller, a science fiction role-playing game primarily. But they also contacted Paul and I about doing stuff for Bushido.
Okay.
Jordan liked Japanese stuff and knew I was into it. He liked Bushido. And of course, one of the great houses in the Battletech universe is very heavily influenced by traditional Japanese culture.
Right.
So he thought I was the perfect fit to write House Kurita.
Nice.
So they took a shot on me. And I turned my novel in on time, and it went through editorial faster than anything had up to that point.
Good. It's a good thing, right?
It was pretty good for somebody's first novel.
Right, right. And I'm sure that was exciting because they had you come back for more books, right?
They did. And I'm told to this day it's widely considered the best standalone Battletech novel.
I'm sure there are plenty of fans that completely agree with that statement.
Well, I mean, other people have their own opinions, but it was kind of edgy, ultimately, for the time. And I got a story related to that too, because I had planned the ending and I figured that FOSSA would never go for it. So I switched it. And after reading through the novel, Jordan came back and said, it shouldn't end this way. It should end another way, which was the way I had originally expected it to end.
Nice.
And
so you were able to get that.
We went ahead with the original plan.
That's exciting. That's awesome.
Yeah. And it makes a better book.
Now, these stories aren't the only, you didn't do just tie-in fiction stuff. You had
correct.
You had, and it's kind of Shadowrun-esque from the way it looks. I haven't read it, but tell me about the Johnny Reddy, A Prince Among Men series.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the whole idea of fantasy intruding in the modern world was already a thing, fiction wise. And of course, we were bringing that into Shadowrun. And I was certainly very heavily influenced by a series, shared world series called Borderlands in terms of that idea.
Yeah.
There's now another thing called Borderlands, which is not what I'm talking
right.
about.
Yeah, that's, I know what you're talking about.
And so the original publisher who was working with FASA, the guy who bought the FASA material, moved. He switched companies.
Okay.
And FASA had used my books as proof that they had something other than junk game writers writing books. So when he moved, he wanted books from me.
Okay.
Right. So he wanted to take me with him.
Yeah.
And he wanted something, vaguely like that. So, it was going to be an urban fantasy intruding into the modern world, but not in the Shadowrun way. And, it wasn't full of mega corporations and really depressing urban sprawls.
Right.
So I brought Arthurian stuff into that mix. And I went on, I did a fantasy series as well for him that just didn't take off. But that actually was based on the original fantasy role-playing world I had done that led Paul Hume to say, the system you're using is reminding me of Japanese stuff.
Oh, okay.
So,
do you remember what series that was? So was that a different one?
The Chronicles of Elwin.
Okay, that was going to be the next one I was going to ask you about.
Aelwyn.
I was going to ask you about that one. How do you go from, the sci-fi modern-esque to a full-on fantasy? But you've already answered that question. But that had more than one book, didn't it?
That was 3 books.
Yeah, so it couldn't have done too bad if you got 3 books out of the dang thing, right?
It was a contract for 3.
Oh, okay.
And like a lot of trilogies, sales tailed down.
Okay.
And with the book industry having gone over basically to computerized ordering, they always base their orders on the previous sales.
Oh.
So it automatically tails down.
Right.
And this is not great. I even did a couple of books in a science fiction universe, but at that point, because of that phenomena, I had to write under a pseudonym because it was not going to have a chance of breaking into good sales.
Yeah. Oh, that's a bummer. So after you did all those, I want to switch gears because there's something that's not gaming related necessarily, but it's still really freaking cool in my opinion. And we talked earlier about the love for, medieval weapons and things like that. You came up with a book, the Chivalric Martial Arts System. That's not the core name of it, but I don't think I could properly pronounce it when I read it. So I'm like, people can Google that and find it. It's like tell me how it's pronounced, because I have
It's Fiore de Liberi's Armazzari. It is the title of the book. You were pulling up the subtitle.
Yes. I saw the full name. I just knew I couldn't pronounce it, so I'm like, I'll go with this title. And
No, it's a study of the teaching system that's encoded in an early 15th century book written by an Italian swordmaster by the name of Fiore de Liberi. And it is the oldest European tradition book that covers all the knightly weapons and is illustrated. So, it covers wrestling, it covers dagger, it covers sword, it covers spear, it covers poleaxe, it covers it on foot, and it covers fighting on horseback. I personally don't do horseback fighting, but I just do the foot stuff.
Right. And you do a lot of stuff with that, because I've seen you go to like symposiums and stuff, or you have in the past done events where that's what you do.
Yeah, the last couple of years, not so much.
Not so much. Well, not much
This is
of
a lot
a
of close contact stuff, not the thing you want to do in a COVID environment.
right, exactly. But that's still really awesome. And a lot of the pictures of you out there are in your armor.
Yes.
Is that something? Did you have someone else make it, or did you? So, for those that are listening,
No,
let me
no,
backtrack a bit.
You need a professional to make good armor that works for you.
Okay.
Um,
I have, as I mentioned to you off stream, and a lot of the people are off podcast and off stream, and a lot of the listeners know I used to perform at Renaissance festivals. I know a lot of the guys out there, and a lot of them will order their weapons and armor and stuff, but they'll go out there and they'll either kind of have a script when they go out there and then fight, but they still kind of have to know what they're doing. Like, and they have, you have to be a squire, and they're the ones helping the horses and putting the armor on and off, and then eventually they become a performer. And then I have not only people I know, but a friend of mine from high school does Renaissance festivals, and they actually have contests where it's one guy versus another guy, and they fight till I think they score points or something like that. And I gotta imagine that you've crossed paths with some of these types of folks in either it's from your book or from these symposiums and things like that. Do you have any insight to maybe those realms?
well, realms is a good way to put it, because there are a lot of variations on this.
Mm-hmm.
You described from the people a couple of versions. What I do is different still.
Okay.
It's not choreographed.
All right.
There are rules, however.
Right.
And normally our fights are run under the kind of rules that medieval deeds of arms were run under, which is there may be a set number of blows,
Okay.
by which we take to mean a successful technique, or a victory condition, such as throwing your opponent to the ground and not going with him,
Okay.
taking him out the gate of the list. And these last two are real medieval victory conditions.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm one of the oldest guys doing this stuff. But and that's what I joined the SCA to learn to do, to understand that and fight like that. And the book I wrote is I wrote it primarily to be an explanation of how the medieval manuscript teaches this art.
Okay.
But it has practical examples of recreating this art. And yeah, so I've been involved in running several symposiums specifically for armored versions of the art, because it covers both armored and unarmored. I'm not fast enough anymore to keep up with the younger guys out of armor. But
you still know what to tell them.
Does its job.
But you still know, even with that, you'd still having the knowledge doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it. People can teach even if they're not capable. So
True.
even if at some point you can't do any of it, you can still say your feet are wrong or your shoulders off or whatever, and explain what they're doing wrong. So I mean, either way, the knowledge is invaluable, and the fact that we talked earlier that you wanted to get this information and you couldn't find it, and then here you're talking about this 15th century book that sounds like it kind of was a hard thing to find, and here you've kind of brought it into more of a modern light for people to read.
There are several surviving copies of this particular one.
Okay.
One of them is incomplete, and one of them is an edition done after the author's death. So 4 of them. And they weren't widely known until like the 90s. And a friend of mine managed to track down where one that had been in a private collection had been bought by the Getty Museum.
Okay.
And he got a microfilm copy of it. And that's when I was first introduced to it. But I was frying other fish at that time, so it didn't take my focus. And about 10 years later, I got seriously interested in it.
Okay.
And kept waiting for other people who were teaching the system to write their books. And then they didn't, and they didn't, and they didn't. So I wrote mine.
Yeah, and the cover looks amazing, by the way. Every time I see it, I was like, God, that looks really cool. Is that you in some of those pictures?
Yeah, I'm the one who usually plays the master
Okay.
in the pictures, and I have a different partner whether it's armored or unarmored, because
Okay.
not everybody has armor.
Right.
And yeah, I also laid the book out.
Nice. Well, for people that are listening, they can go on our Twitch page and there's a guest products. They can go down and click on that, at least for the next 2
I don't know,
weeks.
do you have the link to Freelance Academy Press?
I don't have it on me right now, but I'm sure one of my
I
moderators.
mean, on your the page you were speaking of.
Yeah.
The reason why I mentioned that is it's a small publisher, and while it is available through Amazon, Amazon takes a deep cut. And small publishers need all the help they can get, particularly when they're doing exotic material like historical European martial arts. They need all the pennies they can get.
Well, we will make sure in anybody that's in the live stream, one of the mods just got the link up for the Freelance Academy Press for us. I will update our website at Epic. It's epicrealmsmedia.com, and I will put the link in there as well, along with the Amazon link to all of your other products as well. So we will definitely we'll definitely get that out to everybody so that it can go straight to the Freelance Academy Press, and Amazon doesn't take their crazy cut of doom and destruction that they like to throw in their pocket and then shoot rockets off into space with it. You are not necessarily a social media person. You mentioned that you are dabbling a little bit into YouTube, but not really full into it. So is there anything else you have coming up that you have, other symposiums, other events, products, something you're working on that you want people to know about?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. We hope, assuming pandemic conditions allow it, to have another one of our chivalric fighting arts symposiums in May. That one will be in Kansas, near Kansas City.
Okay.
It's being hosted physically by oh gosh, they just changed their name. They used to be the Kansas City Medieval Swordsman's Guild, and they have a website that has the registration thing. It's already booked, so they have a waiting list running.
All right.
But yeah, so I'll be theoretically doing that in the spring.
Okay.
And ongoing as a project to get a line of miniatures I had been doing independently with people doing the casting for me, called Parroom Station Miniatures. Okay. Most of which is Victorian science fiction stuff. A little bit of the same sort of things that inspired Space 1889, if anybody remembers that old game. Okay. And a little bit of steampunk and sorts of things like that.
Well, and that's huge. That's a huge genre that people love, and I don't think there's enough stuff from that genre out there for people to consume. So that's a great place to put that.
Yeah, well, I ran that for a dozen or more years, and a couple of different companies working with, and finally had to pull the plug on the last one because they weren't reporting to me.
Oh, wow. Well, here's crossing fingers that comes out sooner rather than later for you.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see.
Well, when that comes out, you let me know, and we'll have you come back to we'll just talk about that, and maybe we can do just a live stream and show people the what figures or whatever, and promote it. And so we will keep in touch on that, and we'll hopefully have you
Yeah.
back for that.
Yeah, my life is a little preoccupied right now as we're preparing for selling our house and moving to a new one.
Right? Yeah, you mentioned that earlier off stream, and that's as I said, that's probably the number 2 thing I hate more than anything besides washing dishes is moving. So I get that.
I can understand that. We've moved several times, and every time it's like, call the movers. It's like, we have a lot of books. You need to come out and check it. Oh, no, we'll just no, you got to come out and see it. They come out and say, you have a lot of books. It's like, you haven't seen them all yet. And they invariably underestimate how many book boxes they will be moving.
Right. Wow. That's crazy. Well, good luck on the move. And I want to thank you for stopping in. I appreciate you being in here. And
thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you're very much welcome. Ladies and gentlemen listening to the podcast and our live stream members, we will do a short Q&A for the live stream after the podcast is over with. But I do want to mention, guys, January 10th, 2 weeks from now, we're going to have game designer Seppi Yoon. He is from the company called Fight in a Box. He does Hedgehog Hop, Squirrel or Die, Processing, and so many more board games. So he's going to be with us. He's all over social media. He's got a great personality. We're going to have a great time with him. January 24th, New York Times bestselling author Delilah S Dawson will be joining us. She wrote the Blood series. She's done a whole bunch of Star Wars novels, Hellboy stories, the Shadow series, and Tales of Pell. So that will be January 24th. She will be joining us. February 7th, we're going to be getting Luke Daniels, who's an audiobook narrator. He's in the Audiobook Hall of Fame. He's got probably dozens of awards for his narration work and audio voiceover work. So we're going to have him. He's narrated more than 450 novels, and he is probably also my favorite narrator of all time. We talked with Jarrett Lemaster not long ago, and he's an audiobook narrator who looks up to Luke Daniels, so I'm sure he will also be joining us. So he will be joining us February 7th. So thank you all for listening. Make sure to rate and review. That way we get more visibility on us, and the more visibility on us is more visibility for our guests. So thank you all for listening, and have a great time. And thank you for listening to Epic Realms.